Hey everyone, and hi Daniel. Thanks again for joining us for this live stream. I'm particularly excited about this because usually when we do live streams, it's like very hands-on and we want to show something. This is a little bit more casual and more like a live podcast. So I'm happy to explore this format with you, Daniel. How are you doing today?
I'm doing well, thank you. It's a sunny day. There's blue sky and white clouds out of my window, which is not that normal an experience in
Is it
Edinburgh.
is it an Edinburgh thing or is it an England thing? Because I feel like every time I'm like in London, it's like merp.
I think the weather in London is not that great. It's a bit warmer than everywhere else, but I think it's sort of in a bowl at, I don't know. But as long as you stick on the East Coast going up the UK, sort of right the way, the weather tends to be a lot sunnier than you might think. So it will probably rain but it will be more sunny on more days than you would think. So we have just varied weather. Like if you're easily bored, then don't worry. England's weather has got you covered. And if there's a reason it's the topic of conversation, you meet someone new, crazy weather we've been having. Oh, absolutely. There's always something to talk about there.
So the thing with Kansas City is it's like generally like pretty average, but just in summer it gets like crazy hot and humid. So like for July and August, it's just terrible. So I'll probably stick in my AC office for those 2 months.
Now I think I must have asked you this before, but I can't remember. Are you Kansas City, Kansas, or Kansas City, Missouri?
That is a great question.
Yes.
So I used to be Kansas City. Yes, absolutely. It's like of our local developer conference, KCDC, which is like next week. It's one of the questions in the CFP. Like it doesn't have an impact, but it's just always funny. So I used to live on Kansas City, Missouri, which is like more close, like downtown-ish. But now with the baby, we moved into the burbs. So I'm now Kansas City, Kansas, which I don't want to get too much into politics, but it's not a bad thing.
Oh, I see. The Kansas City, Missouri, that's not the real Kansas City because it's not in Kansas anymore.
It depends on who you're asking. There are some advantages living on the Kansas City, Missouri side, and there are some advantages living on the Kansas City, Kansas side. With the baby, the Kansas City, Kansas side is definitely much better.
I love how diplomatic you're being. Like there are some advantage. I feel like I've stepped unbeknownst to me into like a minefield of like right now there are people in Kansas City, Missouri who are like, I cannot believe I'm never using WebStorm ever again. Like honestly, that pro Kansas.
Awesome. That's really fun. So the thing with just so Kansas City, Kansas has still proper abortion rights, whereas Kansas City, Missouri legalized weed. So those are the two big things why it's like depending on where in life you are, things are better on either side of the state.
Okay. I had no idea. Okay.
So let's get into this. Even though I enjoyed this much, this was great, and I think we should keep doing this. Let's get things going, and I will put stuff here on the screen. It's like I feel a little bit like a magician with all the power I have over StreamYard right now. So some of the organizational stuff up front. One thing that always comes up with, hey, if you have any questions, just put it in the chat. We'll go to that. I'll try to not to be like super obvious that people identify when I'm reading the chat, but it's like slightly here. So if I'm not looking at the camera, it's because I'm reading the chat. The other thing that literally always is asked, will this be recorded? So in case you have missed this, this is the age of the internet where literally everything is somewhat recorded, but this will also be on YouTube after this. Surprisingly, it's the same link, so things are not changing. So if you are watching this, have been watching this, or want to watch it again, it will be on YouTube. And having those said, Daniel, we are here to talk about Nuxt. I mean, it would be somewhat a shame to talk to you about anything other but Nuxt, even though you also know a thing or two about TypeScript. So that would be another fun topic. But Nuxt. So originally, Nuxt 4 was supposed to be released like a couple days ago.
Yeah.
That didn't really happen. Apparently. Someone told me.
Apparently it didn't happen. Who knows? Have you really checked NPM recently?
Let me go. No. Yes, I did.
It's not released. So basically we we always knew we were going to be updating to Nuxt 4 this year, because one of the things that I want Nuxt to have is a stable release cycle. So pretty confident, people can be pretty confident there'll be a patch every week or so, a new minor release every month or so, with whatever features we're dreaming up, and a new major release every year. And which gives us an opportunity to let off some steam, make any breaking changes we need to do, so they don't build up and accumulate tech debt. So this is always going to be one. And we originally were hoping for actually we're originally hoping for Q1, but let's not dwell on that. We appointed June 16th as the day, but before that point, we really hoped we'd be able to do it. We've merged most of the changes that we want to make in Nuxt itself, but we are built on lots of other things. So like Vite, for example, from the bundler point of view, and Nitro, and a lot of other packages in the UnJS ecosystem. And we have more changes we want to make there. So that means that probably if you want, you can install the latest version of Nuxt 3.12.2, and actually enable the breaking changes of Nuxt 4. If you want to see what they are, you can actually opt in today and experience what Nuxt 4 will be like, with the big proviso that the changes coming in Nitro still haven't landed, but pretty much everything else you should be able to play around with it. So it's sort of yes and no. Like we worked really hard to make sure all the big stuff for Nuxt 4 is already tryable. But
okay, I have two questions to that, and I now feel like I need to get my thoughts in order. But from the changes in Nitro, are those going to be breaking changes, or is this more like an infrastructure change under the hood that just seamlessly work? Or
so, well, do you know if a library that we depend on having a major release doesn't necessarily mean that we would. So, for example,
right.
Vite updated, I think, to Vite. What are we at
5?
now? We're on Vite 5 now. It's updated very quickly. So we've updated several major versions of Vite while we've been on Nuxt 3. So yes, I think basically Vite 2 was the beginning of Vite.
Okay.
Because I think Vite was written and then totally rewritten for Vite 2. And so yeah, we've had a few. But I guess the question for me, and we've had discussions about this, the question is like what the impact is on the end user. So is it a breaking change for you, or is it just a breaking change for the framework, which is consuming Vite? And I think Nitro will have breaking changes for end users, depending on what they're doing. So for example, we have event.node, and it has a request and a response object attached to it. And that has been the case for some time. It's been also deprecated for some time. And that's been accessible on the server side. People have been able to use it. We would hope they wouldn't be. In most cases, we have utilities that do anything they would need to do with that request response object. And actually, we emulate, like they're not always real. They are in a lot of cases fake request and response objects, because, for example, it's running in Cloudflare workers or in Dino. Those request and response objects are not being provided by Node, so we're generating them for compatibility. And I think now is the time to say goodbye, for example, to that event.node interface.
Yeah, that makes sense.
So there's some other ones as well. There's a full roadmap for the Nitro release as well, and it's coming along quite quickly. So we've bumped it maybe a couple of weeks, but I'm still hoping Nuxt 4 is going to be out in June. Jan, oh no, it is just me, alone with my thoughts. That's going to be a painful moment. So some of the things, for example, that Nitro is going to cover. We have some changes to its exports, for example. And one of the things that I think I'm most excited about is that we're going to enable async context by default. So async context is we already use in quite a number of places in Nuxt. So it enables us to track dependencies of promises. So, for example, if an incoming request comes in, and then a number of asynchronous operations take place on the server, so a fetch request or something else, normally it's not able, like 5 awaits down, to track back what the context was before the first promise was initialized. But sometimes you want to do that. So you want to be able to know, for example, in development mode, we want to be able to track every log that takes place, every console log, every console warn, whatever happens. We want to track it back and wrap it up and send it to the browser. But obviously we can't do that if we can't track it back to the original request. So async context is enabled by default in Nuxt projects in development to enable that. But in production, enabling async context means that we will be able to do things like not have to worry about the Nuxt instance. So right now, users will be familiar perhaps with the error message, Nuxt instance unavailable, which is often used because of an architecture pattern we have with Nuxt, whereby a lot of stuff is dependent on the event, on the sort of specific request coming in. So you don't want messing up cookies between requests, but we don't want people to have to pass around that request everywhere, back and forth all the time. So what we do is we have this instance, this Nuxt instance, which is set every tick that we do something in the project, and then unset before we move on to process the next request. Sometimes you have multiple requests being processed at the same time. Hello, welcome back. And I'm sure you caught everything that I've just said.
Absolutely. Thanks for keeping everything going. Really appreciate it. I blame AT&T for this.
Absolutely. Well, is it specific only to the Kansas side or also the Missouri side?
I will figure this out after this.
Okay, yes, exactly. You've probably not been on the phone to them yet. So I was just talking about async context, which is one of the changes we're making in Nitro, the next major of Nitro, which is that we're enabling it by default, which will enable a lot of very cool things and things just working, like between the two that maybe beforehand people may have needed to take a little bit of extra effort for. So people can access the next instance without needing to be very specific and thoughtful about how they invoke their context-specific functions. But anyway, I've probably been slightly in the weeds there. I don't know how interested people are in async context.
Like that much, probably. We were talking before I was forced to leave the studio. We were talking about Nuxt 4. One thing I like that you did with 3.12 is that you can also opt in each of the breaking changes individually. I think that is a pretty cool thing for people that are, because realistically, like, people are not going to do big bang releases or like migrations, but like progressive, where they can like, okay, let's look at the first thing, what is breaking, and then I think that was a really cool thing that I've seen in the release notes.
Glad you like it. Yeah, so yeah, as much as possible, we want people to be able to granularly opt in. I mean, we won't probably keep all of those flags around, particularly the ones we've introduced just for the release. But at least hopefully it will help people migrate. I mean, we can only aspire to some of the ease of migration that Angular has.
That's what I'm saying.
Maybe we can even manage something like that.
Yeah, that would be sweet if the semicolons would work better. I don't want to get into that. I'm still mad.
Is that something to do with modifying files and knowing whether or not the style of the file?
Yes.
Yeah, because we have that as well. Yeah, go on.
I mean, for the people that are kind of like, what the hell are those people talking about right now? There is an open pull request by someone who created a script for automatic migration for some of the breaking changes in Nuxt, kind of inspired by what the Angular team did in the Angular CLI. The problem is that my understanding of an AST is that it's independent of the way you write code, because it's an AST, which kind of in the name said it's an abstract syntax tree, so it shouldn't be really influenced by the fact whether the developer uses semicolons or not. But apparently, this library called tsmore thinks semicolons are crucial for that. And the AST is absolutely fundamentally different whether you use semicolons or not. So if you don't use semicolons, the automatic insertions that I have for code pieces end up in the template or some arbitrary place. So it's like, yeah, it's weird and somewhat frustrating, because it would be a cool solution. Yeah.
That is very frustrating.
I have like those flashbacks, like when I was working on that. So
we'll get it.
I think so too. The thing is with Nuxt 4, we talked about like, okay, you want to make the migration easy and all those things, but what is the fancy new thing in Nuxt 4? Or is this really just like a stabilization kind of major kind of thing with some breaking changes for that purpose?
So, maybe we should have talked about this beforehand, because because this is the thing that so we, as much as possible, we're adhering to Semver, which means bug fixes in patches every week, features in minors every month, which means that the only real thing we have for a Nitro 4 is breaking changes. So we're not holding. There will be features. There will be features, but the features will just be the next enhancements that otherwise would be released in a minor. So it's not like the features are going to be sort of mind-blowing, incredible. We hope I don't know. I would like every month for that to be. But basically, I'm sort of anti-hype, as in I have to be. Like, Nuxt 4 isn't going to be. So I think there should be some really nice improvements with it that come with those breaking changes, because there's obviously reasons we are deliberately initiating breaking changes, which nobody would ever want, right? Why would you want a breaking change? So there are things like better, so more performant defaults for our data fetching, which I think everyone will want anyway, probably. So it probably won't break anyone. It will probably just be performance enhancement, but technically it's breaking. We have a new directory structure, which also should come with a big performance boost, due to how watchers work, like in different operating systems. So the default Nuxt pattern has always been a simple one directory. You know, your node modules, you stick a pages directory in there, and instantly you have routing in your app. And that is wonderful, and I still prefer it. But the problem is, when you start a watcher looking for changes in that directory, it crawls every file in node modules. It crawls every file in .git. Like, that is just how it works. So Crocodile, which is basically used under the hood by pretty much every tool, does that. So there are very good reasons why you should really not watch the root directory in a repository. So for example, people will might not even realize, but they should perhaps see really appreciable differences in speed with the new directory structure.
So more developer experience in that sense than really like noticeable impact for an end user at the end of the day. But
absolutely, yeah, I don't exactly. I hope so. We have a list at the moment of sort of each of the changes that you can try out, the impact we think there's going to be. But I think I would hope that nobody would need to. Most people won't need to change their projects at all. So I've already heard of people who are migrating, and people with PRs where there's no change. You know, that people have just moved some stuff around into different folders, and so that's a nice.
That's cool.
That's a nice thing.
I do like that. I mean, I can just relate this to the way the Angular team does it right now, but like where you have new features that you can basically opt in, but everything just still works. So that's a really nice thing, because this way also team can make cognizant decisions like, okay, is this something we need that we benefit from? Or is this something that Greenfield product benefit more? But if you have like a well-defined structure already, you're just good to go.
Yeah.
And also Semver is very, very underrated. It's a nice thing if you know, okay, there's a major release coming, and can accordingly plan. So I know in the Angular ecosystem, a lot of companies, for instance, are always like one major behind, because Angular also does like 2 major versions per year. So that's a nice thing to have, like this planning aspect. I at least like this. So thanks for that.
Yeah.
Appreciate it.
There are 2 escape hatches.
Don't tell me I'm gone again. Oh my.
No, you're still there. You're still there.
You gotta be.
You're still there. Am I gone?
No. Oh, no. I'm good. Am I back?
Yep, you're here. You never left. You've always been here.
So
Present. But I was saying there are 2 escape hatches. You're still there.
Patches.
Yeah,
What?
2 escape hatches from the Semver versioning system in Nuxt. So we have so one is that we have the same kind of thing that you're talking about with Angular. So we have a like a features and future namespace. So if we do have, and we also have an experimental namespace, so we can test things out in experimental, even without a Semver minor. So we can ship a new thing. It's experimental. You can enable it, see how it feels. Eventually, we will, if the experiment works, as it were, we'll enable it by default. And but then it will be, you can still turn it off. And then eventually, if we think there's no reason ever to turn it off, we'll remove the ability to do so. So we have that which can basically run alongside Semver. And we also have one new thing, which is coming in Nuxt 4, which is called compatibility date. Now, compatibility date is a little bit different from the compatibility version I talked about. And it lets you fix the behavior, mostly of presets, like provider presets, to a particular implementation. So imagine you are deploying on, I don't know, Netlify or Cloudflare or something like that. And you have a particular date where you want this to continue to work. So when you create your project, you just say, this is my compatibility date. And that means if there are breaking changes in that preset, in the Netlify or Cloudflare or SL or whatever preset, they won't be applied to your project until you opt in manually. And basically, we'll have tooling that basically says, like, okay, these are the changes that have applied to this preset. But the fact is that we don't want changes to individual provider presets. We support, 70 plus providers across Nuxt. That if they have breaking changes, or we don't, that we'd be going through, we'd be up to Chrome version number levels. Like that's not something we want. So that's the second escape hatch that we have from Semver. And hopefully it's specific enough that it will still be usable for people. It won't affect Nuxt behavior itself, but it will affect maybe some of these presets and providers that do need to have separate versioning.
Yeah, that totally makes sense. That's a pretty cool approach, by the way. I like that.
There's a new library. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt though.
No, you're good. You're good.
So the new library is called CompatX, and it's another UnJS library, and it's definitely worth looking at. That's where we're going to be experimenting with some of these things under the hood.
Are the people in the UnJS community team even like sleeping? Because I feel like there's always something happening, and it's crazy.
That is nice of you to say. I think the person who sleeps the least is Puya. So Puya used to lead the Nuxt team. He's now leading the UnJS team, and he is he's an incredibly talented programmer. Well, yes, a lot of this is his brainchild.
Then thank you, Puya, very much. Really appreciate your work. Sorry, I lost thread with all the internet hiccups. You would have thought that in like 2024, like those internet issues are just not an issue anymore. But hey,
I think basically when the internet goes, it's because basically programming, you are translating ideas into reality. So you basically have a thought and you make it real. And virtually the only thing that's slowing you down in that is the speed of your thought, maybe the speed of your computer, and the speed of the internet. Like that, those are the things. And so, but mostly it's about thinking. So when you have something like a really slow connection, it's almost indistinguishable to me from not being able to think. I don't know if you feel that. Like if you because I've been in some places with very poor internet, and you feel like it feels like you're stuck in molasses. Now, there's no reason that should be the case, right? The internet is a resource, but it actually does. I do feel it in my head, as though, you know, I don't know. So I totally feel for you.
That's surprisingly true, because every time when I work on the plane, I need like a very well-defined problem that I can tackle, because where I know like, okay, this is what I have to do. Or mostly it's like work on some slides or something. But so we have one question from the chat. Let's go get to that right away. I'll put it here on the screen. What is the impact on the module ecosystem? Will Nuxt modules need to be updated, and what's the expected effort timeframe for most modules to become compatible with Nuxt 4? I think that's a great question that probably you can answer, because you work on a lot of Nuxt modules I've seen.
So so I do have some. I maintain myself, and one of the key things that we have in the modules ecosystem is we have a registry, which is public. It's a GitHub repo, Nuxt/modules, and when people want to add their module, that we have a small code review process, and we do have a few on the backlog to be added, but there's no reason not to be. I just need to go and have a look and see if there's any advice I can give. And once they're there, we try and look after them. So I have a tool that I'm working on, for example, which when we have a new breaking change with a mitigation, something that we can do to make it make modules forward and backward compatible, I will basically proactively go out and raise PRs to the modules that it affects. So for example, we changed the path being, this is such a boring change. We changed the path being passed in the builder watch hook. So whenever a file changes on the file system, modules might want to know about it. And so the path used to be always relative to the root directory of your project. But we thought it would be more future-proof to make this an absolute path, so that we can have watches maybe that are not just in the root directory of your project. They might relate to dependencies that are outside, like in a monorepo context. But we can make that forward-backward compatible. So I opened a PR to every single module I could find, and actually even more than just the modules that are on registry. Any package on GitHub that was using that hook, I opened a PR to it. And so all, the power of automation helps a lot. It wasn't purely automated. I did some copying and pasting, and I clicked the create PR button for everyone myself, but it was still so much easier than I could have done otherwise. So the answer is, I am not aware of any impact on modules. I would expect by default the modules should just work with Nuxt 4. In fact, I recently opened a PR to all of the modules that had a constraint. So modules can indicate whether they're compatible with a particular version of Nuxt, for example. And by default, we just sort of had that at caret 3, only to realize, wait a second, we're coming up to 4. It's suddenly every module is going to be marked incompatible. And so I sort of opened a load of PRs to say, hey, let's just do it greater than or equal. Because we put a lot of effort in releasing 3 to creating the Nuxt SDK, this Nuxt Kit, which means that modules that use that should not really have to worry about compatibility going forwards, because so a module will do something like, we'll add an auto import or add a component, and it can use add component or add import. And if that changes under the hood in Nuxt, then the module doesn't need to know about it. It shouldn't.
True.
So in most cases, I really, I hope modules don't have to update. Some, I guess, that are deeply dependent on or if they're making an assumption about the Nuxt project, then maybe they might have to be updated, but by default they shouldn't.
Okay, that's really cool, and I appreciate your effort of going through all the modules and the migration, because at the end, you know, and you and the team know what it's going to be to go through those migration process. So that's a nice touch, even though I feel a little sorry for you, but I appreciate it.
It'll be better when we have your automated schematic-based migration structure, which I like. I think that would be really nice. And also, it's not just about major versions, but there are also migration steps for minor versions where we do put code snippets and say, here is the here's what you should do to use the new feature. And actually, I think if that can be done in an automated way, that's better.
Technically, those schematics support that, and they even support optional ones where you could say like, "Hey, I want to opt into." Yeah, it would be cool. It would be really cool. Awesome. I had a question. I had a good question. One thing I saw, so in the React ecosystem, like I was just at a React conference, so I feel like I have an opinion on that. Every other talk was about React server components. And I've seen that Nuxt is also doing something with server components. How does it compare?
So we had server components very early. At some point, I thought we had them before React, but that was definitely not true. Not true. Because but very, very close. But our server component implementation is somewhat different. So, and definitely it's different from the experience of using them. So we can talk about the difference of implementation. We can also talk about the difference of how it feels like as a developer to use them.
Let's maybe start at the point of what do you consider a server component, because I have an idea of how React treats server components now, but what is the Nuxt approach to server components then?
Well, maybe that is a very big difference. So a server component for Nuxt is a component that will always be rendered. That is, the HTML will always be generated on the server. And it's otherwise the same as any other component. So it has its props, but when the props change on the client, a network request goes to the server and says, "Hey, would you re-render this?" And then the response comes back, and we put it in the DOM. So that's basically what happens. We also have client components, which are never rendered on the server; they're only rendered in the browser. So on the server, when you're rendering the first page, because use client, use server, forget all about that, because that's totally irrelevant to Nuxt. Like, there's none of this. What context are we in, kind of thing. So that's it's basically just physically where a component is being rendered. We still prefer that all of the stuff which is server-y, like fetching from a database, doesn't happen in the component. It happens in a server root. So we have Nitro as our server framework, so you stick everything in there. And the components can use fetch to fetch from the server roots. And if it's happening in the same place, so if you're rendering a component on the server, it doesn't make a network call. It just calls the function, but it still looks like a fetch call. And that means that stuff works isomorphically. So on a server, it does this direct function call, and on the client, it does perform a network call. But you never need to know where your component is being rendered. It doesn't matter, because whether it's a function call or a direct or a network call, it's adhering to the fetch specification. And so it's going to feel and you handle it in the same way, which basically means we don't have the danger of writing code which might, for example, leak your secrets or something like that.
So are there any concerns with like potential waterfalls with that fetch request if you have like, well, okay, if you have two server components that use each other, it's just a call at that, or like just a function call at that point, you said, right?
Yeah. I mean, it's always waterfall is always going to be an issue. I mean, I'm following the latest React sort of cache, like suspense behavior.
Figured.
Great interest. But yes, making it easier for people to make good architecture choices for their apps is an important thing that we need to do. But at the end of the day, those are often about architecture choices. So, if you can build an app that is going to suffer from waterfalls in any framework pretty easily, but yes, hopefully that shouldn't be the case in server components particularly, any more than anything else. And if you're using the server routes that I talked about, you can specify very granular caching, including SWR, like stale while we validate strategies. So you can have pretty instantaneous responses from servers, which are actually a great deal slower, which means that you can almost, even if you do have waterfalls, your app can behave as though it doesn't, because it's able to use cache data at every stage.
That's pretty cool. I like that. There's another question in the chat. Whose idea was it to create Nuxt Bridge? What should we expect from Nuxt Bridge? Many developers are worried about its instability.
So this question reads a little bit like, who is responsible for inflicting this monstrosity upon the world? And the answer is,
before we go into that, can we maybe take a step back for the people that might not know Nuxt Bridge, like someone?
So Nuxt Bridge is a Nuxt module that runs in Nuxt 2 that lets you use some of the that lets you granularly adopt some of the features and APIs of Nuxt 3. So for example, you can enable Nitro as your backend rather than Connect that was there before. You can use PostCSS 8. You can use Vite. So you can use the different sort of implementation of TypeScript working out of the box, which, believe it or not, Nuxt 2 didn't have when we started working on Nuxt 3. So there are a number of things that it does. And I think it's always difficult to go back and try and remember, because a lot of these things are joint decisions, they're conversations. I think it was my idea, but it might not be. It really might not be. And most of the decisions that we made were done sort of as a team. It might have just been the name. I might have just come up with a name. So please don't definitely all the credit for all the good stuff should go to the whole team for sure. And what should we expect from it? So, well, the thing is that Nuxt 2 comes to its end of life in end of June 30th. And Nuxt Bridge is a module for Nuxt 2, which means that it will be, we hope, useful for people migrating to Nuxt 3. But the aim is never for people to stay on Nuxt Bridge. It is only a way of helping people migrate to Nuxt 3. So I don't know exactly what you mean about instability. I think it's working quite well. We have a fantastic developer, Ryota, who is doing a lot of work to fix any issues with it, and he's been doing a really great job. But I would not be urging people to stay on Nuxt Bridge, even though the aim is to get your app into the place where you can migrate it to Nuxt 3 or 4, rather than keep it on Nuxt 2, because that will be end of life and it won't be getting further updates after the end of June.
Yeah, that makes sense.
I commented also, I'm afraid, in an automated way. I commented on every issue in the Nuxt repo. There was an issue with Nuxt 2, just basically asking people, is this an urgent or critical issue? Please let me know before the end of life date. I've already got some responses, and we have 2 PRs I just merged today addressing issues on the 2.x branch. So if you're using Nuxt 2, we've got very little time, but I'm willing to do some things and to sneak in to make your life better. But Nuxt 2 has been, we started work on Nuxt 3 over 2.5 years ago. Nuxt 2 is I would really say migrate. And I'm sorry for the pain If you've experienced pain migrating to Bridge, the migration from 2 to 3 was a massive, massive pain. And my chief objective is to make sure that never happens again. And I'd probably, my main thing I want to come out from Nuxt 4 is for it to be evident that it doesn't happen again. So migration is a big priority for me. I'm sorry about this one, but I would say migrate.
I do have to say, though, that it's admirable that you do backwards fixes. I know a lot of open source projects like ArcGIS, where I'm involved in, just don't do backwards fixes because it's such a hassle.
Yeah.
So very, very much appreciated too that you put in the effort. There is another question. Do you have any news about Nuxt Auth? Will it be based on Nuxt Auth utils?
So I think, yes, look to Nuxt Auth utils. That's a good place, because Nuxt Auth is worked on by Puya and Sebastian. Nuxt Auth utils is a module by Sebastian, tackling this question of auth. So auth there are lots of solutions for building authentication in Nuxt 3. The question is, can we make something which is flexible enough to be used in sort of all situations? Now, Nuxt Auth utils is great. It works for a huge range of OAuth providers. There's also Nuxt OIDC Connect, I think, which works basically with OIDC Connect. And then there are a lot of integrations with particular third-party vendors. There's even NextAuth or Auth.js implementations for Nuxt. And so there's a lot of stuff out there. Definitely don't wait. If you want to build auth in your project, use Nuxt Auth utils. Use something else that's out there. This should not be a blocker for you. But yes, I think it probably will be end up based on Nuxt Auth utils. It will probably also be more focused, and this is a general pattern that we have, of building lower level utilities that module authors can use in their projects, rather than so something like authentication or logging. These are such big topics that depend so much on what you might specifically want to do in your project, that it's very easy to do. Like, it's much easier to do them than it is to come up with a implementation that covers every possible use case and does so without any downsides. So it's always very tricky, because particularly it's also very easy to think that the way you do something is also a more universal pattern than it is. Lots and lots of people, like virtually everything about the Nuxt Auth that worked with Nuxt 2, like almost everything about it had to be customizable. And in the end, for example, I never even used it in my projects because it wasn't customizable enough. So it's really hard to get that one right, which is why it's taken a while. But there are plenty of good solutions out there that are not core modules.
Thanks, Jeremy, for the question. Appreciate that. So, Daniel, yes, I think it was yesterday, maybe Saturday. Time got blurry with international flights. You asked about web workers on Twitter.
Yes.
And it sounded like you are building something. Is there anything you can give us a sneak peek from or something?
Oh yeah, so absolutely. So one thing, so there's the question is how broad I end up going, but so you can use web workers today in Nuxt, but I want to make it zero config basically, so that people can use web workers as easily as they do anything else in their projects. Because my supposition, and the reason I asked about this on Twitter, is that one of the things that keeps people from using web workers is a sort of gap of, how would I do that? Do I now have to use this different syntax of event handlers and posting messages back and forth between the contexts? And so basically, I have a Nuxt module proof of concept that basically does away with that. You have exports from a worker file, and they just are functions that you call in the rest of your app, and everything just works seamlessly. So you get typed auto imports that like work to across the worker divide, and I think that will be a really, really nice feature for Nuxt users. I'm also trying to make it in such a way that it doesn't just work for Nuxt users, but also other frameworks too. And the aim is basically just better DX for developers around web workers, rather than fundamentally changing the paradigm. Web workers are great. If you've not used web workers, they basically have lower priority than the main thread. So stuff might happen slower in a web worker. But what it won't do is block user interaction or experience. So you can basically offload stuff that is non-critical. There's a cost, because everything you pass to and from the worker has to go through a portal, be cloned, and then reestablished in a different context. So it's like Star Trek transporter stuff. It's not just the same object, and therefore there's memory questions, and so there's a performance cost. But it really can make an app much smoother, particularly if you're doing anything that is computationally heavy, or if you feel like your app is slow. It can really improve user responsiveness. So that is something which I think is often people should reach for that sooner than they do. And so if I can get rid of some, so anyway, what I'm working on is reducing some of the friction to use web workers. Does that sound like a good idea to you?
It sounds like a lovely idea. So I used web workers once for polynomial curve fitting, which is like technically a pure operation. If you have like there are different algorithms that you can implement, but it's like heavy computational, where you basically like take each point that you have and try to build a curve between that. So, and the next step that we wanted is like basically try different algorithms and get the most accurate result. And then you're out of nowhere like multiplying the efforts that you already spent. So that would have been really nice to further dig into, but I didn't make it that far. But yes, that's when we use web workers, and it was definitely much nicer than do all the computation on the main thread.
Excellent. Well, hopefully, you'll have to tell me what it.
So it sounded like a new UnJS package then, potentially, if you want to provide it for the broader ecosystem, or was that just a guess on my side?
Hopefully it will be. I need a good name though. If you can give me a good name, I'll definitely.
I'll think about it.
Think about that. Okay.
Well, that's also a good opportunity to force interaction in the chat if anyone has a good name for an UnJS package for web workers. I do love some of the names that you have in the UnJS package. They're pretty funny. Another question that came up in the chat is, why Nuxt? Why would someone use Nuxt?
So it's a good question. So Nuxt is, so normally I would ask you, like if I had a chance, I would say, so tell me about your project, like, because obviously there are lots of questions. So this isn't why you should use Nuxt, but this is why some people use Nuxt. So Nuxt is a framework for building full stack web applications. The idea is it's zero configuration, but gives you full control. So you can make any amount of tweaking that you need to do. It has a really big modules ecosystem, which you can see at nuxt.com/modules, with integrations for lots and lots of different providers or libraries or solutions, where people have used the ability to hook into Nuxt to implement features and make the developer experience better for that. So often people choose Nuxt because it has a sort of very quick starting experience. So you can basically pretty much immediately start building what you need to build. You pull in the modules that add the features you need. If you ever need to do something yourself, you can, but you basically have a very, very good starting position. And you can also, it's very granular. So you can say, this part of the app is client-side only. This part of the app is going to be pre-rendered, like generated at build time. This part of the app, will have no JavaScript. So you can do stuff that's on the more advanced side. But I would definitely be pointing to the modules ecosystem. I would also say that a lot of the features in Nuxt 3 are composable. So you pick it's only part of your bundle when you use them, for example. So it has everything, like a library, but it's not all imposed on you. So it's your choice what you take advantage of. So if you're, for me, I mean, obviously it's, I'm a maintainer, so I'm probably much more likely to use it in all
Are you saying you're
situations.
biased here?
Well, like I think these things are tools. So they're I absolutely am biased, of course, but I mean they're tools. And so the key thing is I really think people identify too much as I'm a Vue developer, I'm a React developer, I'm an Angular developer, or whatever. When in fact, like all of those things, they're frameworks you have some or less experience with, but none of them are worth pinning an identity on. And so, I mean, obviously, I think Nuxt is great. I work as hard as I can to make it as amazing as I can. But at the same time, I would really hate it if my identity was tied to it, in the sense that I would think less of somebody for using or not using it. But anyway, but I would tend to use Nuxt in almost in lots of different situations. So even if I'm building up, I don't need any server-side rendering. I would still pick Nuxt for like other benefits. I'd use it, for building a VS Code extension. I'd probably use it for building a Chrome extension, not least because context switching is a very real problem. So when you get familiar with how something works, you're able to know the conventions and know how they work, then being able to use that same tool to build something different or something different, actually it really has a significant return in your productivity, because even though the tool itself might be in a different targeting something different, and even if there might be a tool which is slightly more precise in that exact niche, the ability to know what you're doing and to feel familiar with what you're doing is a very, very significant benefit as well. So
that's true. I remember you have an IDE open in the background. Is there anything you wanted to show us particular, or was this just in case it comes up? I don't want to steal your thunder if there's an announcement that you wanted to make here or something.
I've got to say, we're not live releasing Nuxt 4 now. But yeah, I'm be more than happy to show you if you want. I could start a new Nuxt 3 project in version 4 compatibility mode.
Let me get you here on the stage. Hide the question. Sweet. Okay, you're on.
Amazing. Okay, so this is a terminal, and you can basically create a Nuxt 4 style project using the v4 compat template. So if you run nuxi latest init, and then pass this -t v4 compat template, and then you put a directory name. In this case, it's this one here. I'm gonna force it because I already created it, and install the deps. You'll basically get the new shape of what a Nuxt 4 project is going to look like, which might be handy for testing things out. Or if you're starting a new project, I would definitely do it this way. So you could run your project in compatibility version 4. You'll see what that looks like. So it has got an app folder, which is effectively what you might have thought of as your source directory in Nuxt 3. So that is where most of your Vue code is going to go, your plugins and things like that. Public, so that your public files and your server are going to live outside of that. And all of that is going to help us give you better performance, but also I think help people understand where the boundaries are. That, for example, the server isn't something running inside, but the app is a separate thing running alongside. And so you would be able to do most of the other kinds of things that you would want, like, let's see, we could create a new file, app, plugins, and that's going to live inside your app directory. And then you would basically be able to continue operating in exactly the same way as before. And then basically that exactly the same kind of experience that you've probably had with Nuxt 3 would be there with Nuxt 4 too. What are some other interesting changes that you might have? So data fetching in Nuxt 4 is more performant because it's going to be non-reactive. So that the data that you get, whether the data is there or not, that's reactive, but changes deep within it, for example, won't be. So if you have a massive JSON object or a JSON array, mostly people don't need that to be reactive, right? That's coming from an API somewhere. You're not going to be changing the title of something inside of it and require your UI to update when you do that. So you can basically just do something like const data is use async data, and then do something here. I don't know. You would use fetch for this normally, but what is it? JSON placeholder typicode.com to-dos. Is that the sort of thing we're hitting? Yeah. So that would basically be non-reactive. And so if you would then to display that in your template, it's going to be non-reactive. Also, we have some better type support for some of the kinds of responses that we have here. So for example, error is going to be undefined rather than being initialized to null in Nuxt 3. And the same is also true of data. If you're doing something like use fetch, it will also be undefined. Or in this case, it's unknown because I'm not fetching an internal API. But basically, everything defaults to undefined, which is a slightly better type and value to have rather than using null to mean something special. And yes, I don't know. Nuxt 4, I'm very much hoping it's a minor kind of update for folk rather than a totally unfamiliar place.
I love
but
the
all of
idea.
that
So
is enabled just for this future compatibility version there.
That's pretty cool. So I have a question, and depending on your answer, we might clip that or cut this out at the end. So in a lot of your live streams, you're using VS Code, but also at your last year on our JavaScript day, you're pretty professional with WebStorm. And I mean, right here, I can also see you're using WebStorm. So what is your relationship status with WebStorm and VS Code?
So I think IDEs are very personal to people. So it's
True.
very much about preference. I mean, I really love the way that that JetBrains is sort of leaning into giving a really nice experience for users, like having great TypeScript support, for example. I know we've been chatting about that, and has really nice experience with Nuxt as well. So we have absolutely, I think, more than VS Code, often WebStorm users are like fanatical about WebStorm. Like they really, really love it.
That's true.
So I mean, I would like to be equally happy with. For me, stuff is more important. I care a lot about the aesthetic of my code editor. You can probably tell I've heavily customized it here. I really like WebStorm. It's great. But yeah.
That was a fair answer. I appreciate that. I hope I didn't scare our marketing people in the background too much by this question. But another question I was asked in the chat, and that is probably the last question because we're going close to the end of this. So what is your ethos on DX versus magic? Where do you draw the line?
So DX versus magic. So I think the danger is that one person's and I guess the question is whether you think magic is a bad thing or a good thing. So I think magic is a good thing. And I don't think the idea is that we shouldn't have magic, but I think the thing is that we should have, I don't know, discoverability and customizability. So if there's a behavior that you don't understand because you can't understand it, then that's a problem. That is, and that needs to be addressed it can be addressed with documentation. We also address it in Nuxt with dev tools. So the Nuxt dev tools is genuinely one of the most amazing things to come out of Nuxt in recent years, such that lots of other frameworks are like trying to adopt it as well. And we would love that, by the way. There's no ownership for ideas. That would be great if we can collaborate on that. But basically, the dev tools are meant to be a way to see some of that. If you need to poke, there's also like TypeScript. So we don't have any custom TypeScript plugins or anything. Everything is pure TypeScript. So we, for example, when we were typing in here, let's see, use fetch, like this is typed. We have documentation here. And this type is coming because we have told TypeScript that this is available globally. And so we're able to then benefit from it. And we can do the same with lots of other things. So we can use view composables like ref. And again, we've told TypeScript that this is globally available. And so we're able to pull it in. And I'm sure there's some WebStorm hard work going in there as well. But like, as much as possible, that is meant to get rid of the, to help the discoverability. And then the DevTools adds quite a lot to that. So there's lots of different panels that expose information about your routing and how the routes are generated, or the available auto imports and the documentation for them, or what your modules are, any stuff the modules want to add. And then customizability, you should be able to turn it off. So if you don't like it, if you don't want it to happen, you should be able to get rid of it. And so with that in mind, I don't think it's about picking a line between DX and magic. It's about deciding what is a good experience. If it's a good experience, as long as you have the ability for people to understand how it's happening and the ability to customize it, go for it. But if someone thinks it's not a good experience, I don't like this as a developer, I guess it's I'd love to have that conversation with you. And sometimes it's about taste and experience. I did not originally like auto imports, for example. I thought this is going nowhere. But after I started using them, like particularly when you look at like code like this, that's it. I just like how simple and clear it is what I'm writing. Like this is just the code that matters. Like the import statements, that's something that maybe even if you had them, you would want your editor to hide from you, because it's just extraneous information. What matters is that I can click here and go to it and see it, see what it does and see its implementation, not that there's an explicit import statement above it. But yeah, I guess at the end of the day, it's fine if people have different opinions on that. As long as there's customization.
I love how you do, like, it's basically this discussion between convention over configuration, kind of like the Rails approach, just that you found like a very middle ground kind of approach where it's like meaningful defaults, which goes very much in the direction of conventions over, but you still can customize it. So it's, I like the approach you picked there. It's refreshing.
Thank you.
So, all right, thanks a lot for all the questions. Let's wrap things up here because we're already 4 minutes over time. Let's see if I can just kick you out all the power.
Can't believe you would do something like that. Goodness me.
So as I said earlier, this live stream will be available on YouTube. You can check out more information. You should absolutely follow Daniel for all the amazing things he's doing. And Daniel, with that, I really much appreciate your time jumping on this. It's a live stream. Jumping on this live stream with me, sharing all the Nuxt 4 goodies. And thanks everyone for joining us today. Thank you very much. Appreciate you.
It's been such a pleasure.